so we're just going to start, and I think you guys don't mind if the ladies start.
I'm not so sure about that. Why the ladies there and we here?
Yeah, no, this is definitely not going with the way things are going in our current day and age, where there's no chivalry anymore. There's no more gentlemen.
We'll go first then.
I think just to be normal, we should let the guys go first. No, I'm just teasing. I'm sure these guys are just teasing as well. So we're going to give the guys 5 minutes just to introduce themselves and to let you guys know who they are, where they come from, and briefly what they're up to at the moment. And then we'll get a little bit deeper after that. Liesl, you want to go first?
Yes, my name is Liesl Pretorius. Do you need the mic? Good evening, my name is Liesl Pretorius. I'm an attorney. I'm the head of legal with Freedom of Religion South Africa, or FORSA for short. FORSA is a legal advocacy organization dedicated to upholding the right to religious freedom and related rights in South Africa within the framework of the South African Constitution. As an organization, what is very important and linked to religious freedom is obviously the right of parents, and we'll be speaking about families and schools and children this evening, and also the autonomy of religious organizations to conduct their own internal affairs. As an organization, we are politically neutral, faith neutral, and doctrinally neutral. And the work that we do includes making representations to Parliament, to government departments, etc., engaging with the religious community specifically to raise awareness and education about their rights and their responsibilities, and enabling members of the public to engage in the democratic lawmaking process, to engage with persons and organizations whose rights are being threatened. We also build key stakeholder relationships with allied and like-minded organizations, and engage with the media to raise awareness about these important issues.
Awesome stuff. 2 minutes, not 5 minutes. Mara, you want to go next?
Yes.
You guys can hear, hey? Awesome stuff, because the speaker's in front of us.
Yeah, and I should add that they do a brilliant job in advocacy and lobbying. So my name is Mari Sukers. I'm part of the ACDP, the African Christian Democratic Party. ACDP was founded right at the birth of our democracy and formed part of the very first democratic parliament, and we're still standing as an organization that contends, fights, and has a vision for a Christian democracy in South Africa, and for transformation of the African continent based on the biblical worldview. I think as an organization, we have certainly made a permanent mark in the South African political environment as the first Christian political party in the country. There's a number of significant contributions that we've made, both in legislation and a number of achievements or victories to fight for the biblical worldview where policy and legislation is concerned. I serve on the portfolio committees of social development, health, and basic education. We currently have a representation of 4 public representatives, and I would say, if we look over the last term, that we certainly, and the 30 years, we have a very strong, credible, hard work ethic, and some of the most respected members of Parliament in the National Assembly, and one of them are here. So
that's Maury.
Thanks, and good evening, everyone. My name is Christopher Corderio. I'm from an organization. I'm wearing 2 hats tonight. So I'm from an organization called Learn Free, which is an education advocacy organization, strategic consultancy on education as well, and we have a very kind of simple kind of motto, in the sense that we want to make learning available to everyone, anywhere, at the lowest possible cost, and you can look at cost in many different ways, in terms of time and in terms of, but in terms of money as well. And so that's kind of one of the hats that I'm wearing, and I think when I'm speaking from a policy perspective, that will be who I am. But I'm also here on behalf of the Pezelozzi Trust, which is one of the organisations that we consult to. Learn Free is a very small boutique organisation. I think in marketing they call it a boutique organisation. In reality, like niche is also boutique and niche. What that means is like very small. In reality,
very special.
Overloaded, like a handful of overloaded people. That's what it really means. That's what a boutique looks like. But I'm also here on behalf of the Pezelozzi Trust, which is one of the organisations that we consult to. I think people know the Pezelozzi Trust as a civil rights organisation that has been fighting in the education space for the rights for civil education rights and for the rights of parents and families to home educate their children for well over 20 years. And I'm actually going, and when I speak in my speech, I think I'll also explain why that is actually so important and has allowed the Trust to do what it has done with particularly the BELA Bill. So that is just, but on behalf of the Trust, let me say I'm most probably here to answer your questions. More than make any kind of policy statement. Let me also just thank you all for being here. Thanks to Vaughan and thanks to Livingston House. I found out this afternoon that at my hotel, which is very trendy, they're having something about creatives, something about, I think the part that's concerning me is hip hop. And that's happening in the floor under where I'm staying. So I don't know about the others here, but you can ask questions until quite late, until at least the hip-hop people have gone.
Great. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Steve Swart. I'm a Member of Parliament for the African Christian Democratic Party. And because I was quite intimidated by the big audience tonight, I thought I'd invite my colleague Maury to back me up as well. Only joking, but I've been in Parliament since 1999, and I bring warm greetings from Reverend Kenneth Meshwe, the founder of the ACDP, a mighty man of God. And, we're all about kingdom work. And we were up in Kwakwa last week, canvassing door to door, and we came to house, and as good believers, there was an 88-year-old lady there, and our president asked Insu to, how are you doing? And, are you saved? And she was unsure. And right there, he brought her to the Lord. Prayed a prayer of salvation for her. The next thing, there were two Gogos next door, and they heard him pray and said, no, we also want to give our hearts to Jesus. So salvation came to that house, and that's what the ACDP is all about. It's about kingdom work. And I've been honored to serve our leader, Reverend Kenneth Meshwe, since 1999 in the Justice Portfolio Committee. My background is that of law. I'm the chief whip of the ACDP in Parliament. I'm the only whip, but I'm the chief whip as well. That means you're a member of the Chief Whips Forum. So it's a very exciting time in our nation. It's a time for us, and I just want to honor all the ACDP people that are here tonight, the leaders, the councillors. Thank you. You guys are stars, and we just need to push through this last 3 weeks. There's a change coming. Yes. And there's such a good change coming. And I did a tour through Parliament today, through the burnt Parliament, that is almost significant of our state of the nation. I was in Parliament on the day Parliament burnt down. And it was significant, I think, to a certain degree, of the laws that have been passed there, and it's time it's been destroyed, and there's something new that needs to arise. And it's interesting, today Parliament was handed over to the construction people to start demolition and rebuilding. So it was quite a poignant sense for me, but at the same time knowing that all these laws that are being passed, and I'll touch on a number of them, some of them today, so that we can understand the need for our Christian values, our Judeo-Christian values to be reinstilled, and the great threats such as the BELA Bill that is being spoken about today. So thank you with those few words, Vaughan. Appreciate everyone. Thank you for inviting us, and we look forward to a wonderful evening together. Thank you.
Yes, well, it's few words now, many more words just now. So I've got these guys together because, and for those that hear me speak often on various podcasts and radio stations, I'm big on legacy. And like I said last week, I did a presentation on the reclassification of gender. And for those that were here, they were extremely blessed, but also extremely shocked. And it was basically a journey down the rabbit hole to show people where we could be in 20 years' time in South Africa if we're not careful. And it's got a lot more to do than just with gender reclassification. There's a lot more underlying stuff going on. And all of these kinds of things that are happening in Parliament at the moment that sort of fly under the radar. The WHO thing that Steve's going to speak about just now, I find very interesting. I didn't even realize it was happening until Steve mentioned to me on a WhatsApp chat. And so I'm very keen to hear what all of these guys have to say. This is something that we want to get together and educate people on what is going on, because there's a big gap in South Africa at the moment and in the world. And I touched on this last week when I was giving the guys the stats on mental illness in our Gen Z since 2000 to 2023, and how crazy anxiety, depression, and suicide have gone up and up and up. And then I juxtaposed that with all of the social media stats on how much time we are spending on screens, how much time we are using social media, especially the Gen Zs. And you can draw your own conclusions when you put those two together. I don't have to do anything. What I'm trying to say here is there's a problem with legacy. You see, we've got a lot of people like Liesl and Mari and Christopher and Steve who know so much, but we are not getting it out there onto enough channels for people to see. People are going online and they're not seeing the good stuff. They're not learning what they need to learn. So we're losing a generation. We are talking about bills that are just being passed in Parliament. We're talking about the BELA Bill, which, come on, really? Is it that bad? Seriously? Liesl's going to be touching on the ECE Toolkit. Is it that bad if we are giving our teachers these kinds of guidelines? Steve's going to be talking about the WHO. Christopher's going to be touching on a lot of stuff and the community work that he's doing, as well as homeschooling. So we've got some homeschoolers here. Listen carefully. And that is about the most I am going to be speaking all night. All I'm going to be doing now is handing over to Liesl. I'm going to give the guys about 10 minutes to 15 minutes each. I said to them, I don't want to rush this. We want to hear what they have to say and hear what they're involved with, because these are extremely fundamental issues that we're dealing with, especially with our young children in South Africa at the moment. And we need to leave that legacy. We need to impart this knowledge. We need to give back. Once we've gotten old enough and learnt a few things, we need to be able to give it back to our young people and not just hold on to it, because there's going to be a massive vacuum for genuine knowledge and genuine education if we don't. Because all the other guys are on your screens every single day, feeding people things, and we're sitting back and we're ignoring it. So I'm just saying, don't get off social media. Get onto social media and start spreading the word, and get out there and be a positive influence through what I like to call old-fashioned discipleship, taking ownership of people. So that's enough of me talking. Liesl, I'm going to hand it over to you and you can start.
Pardon my cough. So I think let me start with the ECE Toolkit, the Early Childhood Education Toolkit. Now this is a toolkit produced by the Department of Basic Education. It's aimed at children aged 0 to 9 years, because that's early childhood education. The department will say that this is a teacher training material, but who will these teachers be training? Where will the teachers go with the knowledge that they are being given through this toolkit? This toolkit is also in its final form, and it has been rolled out in at least 5 provinces. So why are we concerned by this toolkit? Well, first of all, we're concerned about parental rights. We're concerned about lack of meaningful public participation, and we're also concerned about the rights of teachers. So let's start with parental rights. And just to give you a little background on parental rights. So the policy document, the white paper on education and training, is a policy document for basic education, and it means laws in that sector need to conform to this policy document. This document states unequivocally that parents have the inalienable right to choose the kind of education that is best for their children, particularly in the early years of schooling. This is the Early Childhood Education Toolkit. So especially in the early years of schooling. And that includes the religious and cultural basis of that child's education. Parents also have a right to be consulted concerning what is being taught to their children. So that's why meaningful public participation is important. Broad, meaningful public participation. We are not sure that any parent was consulted, and we are not sure that most parents are even still aware of this toolkit. So what is the concern with the toolkit? The toolkit is ideological. It proposes a certain worldview on sex and gender to the exclusion or marginalization of other worldviews. Now, public schools, at least in South Africa, have to be ideologically neutral. That doesn't mean that worldviews, including religions, are not welcome in public schools. It only means that you can't have one to the exclusion of others. There should be space for everyone. But this toolkit has a very specific way that it views sex and gender. And I want to just read some quotes from the toolkit so that you can decide for yourselves what you think the ideological view of this toolkit is. It says, most of us have been raised with the idea that there are two sexes, male and female, and that they align with two genders, man and woman. However, both sex and gender exists across a continuum of possibilities. ECD teachers and practitioners play a critical role in providing equal opportunities for all young children to engage and learn and help them break free from harmful gender stereotypes that hold them back in life. Use pictures and stories to talk about gender roles and promote gender diversity. Display examples of gender non-conforming individuals and use activities to question gender roles and stereotypes to promote gender equality. Growing up, many of us were taught that if you were identifying as a single person, that by a pronoun you had to use he or she. They was only for a group of people. Those rules have changed. They or them is now a non-binary way to address someone. Using they and them lets children know that we cannot assume somebody's gender just by looking at them. Many families and communities hold to prevailing harmful gender roles and boundaries, and may also impose gender stereotypes and expectations on children. I don't know, some people feel like they are either a boy or a girl, and there are also children who feel like they are both, or they don't feel like either one. There are lots of ways to be boys or girls or something else. Isn't that great? By asking learners from a young age for their preferred name and pronoun, teachers can make room for children who may be exploring their gender identity and demonstrate that gender identity should not be assumed. Tell me, what do you think makes someone a real boy or a real girl? Do you think we get to decide for others, or do each of us get to decide for ourselves? Well, we don't know by just looking at someone what their gender is, who they are. Use children's references to stereotypical ideas about gender as a teachable moment about the incredible variations of gender that exists. So I've read quotes, direct quotes from the toolkit, and I wanted to use those direct quotes because when FORSA put out a landing page where we started to address these things, we were slapped with a fake news allegation. But please decide for yourself whether you agree, because we were very careful to use direct quotes and we used page numbers as well. So we are concerned about parental rights because this is a very specific worldview. This clashes with parents' rights to raise their own children according to their own cultural, to their own religious beliefs and values. That is a right that the Education White Paper recognizes. That is a right that's entrenched in international law. There was no meaningful public participation. And then obviously teachers in the workplace also have the right to freedom of religion. They might be forced to use words that they don't want to use. That's freedom of expression. As an organization, together with a coalition of religious leaders of various faith groups, Christian, Muslim, and the African spirituality faiths, we met with the Department of Basic Education twice in December last year and March this year. We presented the 36-page document of concerns, setting out what the concerns were. We asked that there be a public engagement process, that these documents that are coming through the department, that they are scrutinized. We asked for a moratorium on the rollout of this toolkit until there's been a proper consultation. And we asked for the establishment of a family values unit in the department to build a critical bridge so that parents, who are the main stakeholders in their children's education, and their communities, and everybody who has a part in this child's life, can speak to the department, because that would be in the best interest of children. These requests have been dismissed, and the department is adamant that they will continue with the rollout of this toolkit. So that is our concern. But what we have done is we have created a web page, a special dedicated web page on our website, where we put more information about the toolkit. You can find links to the toolkit there, and you can go see for themselves, because we are not child development experts. We are not commenting on the content of the toolkit, but we are saying that parents have a right regarding what is being taught to their children. They have a right to be consulted about that, and that they need to be given that opportunity, and they have not been given that opportunity. And there's a survey that you can complete as well. So we encourage people to do that, to have their say about this content. And we also do note the concerns that those who are working in the medical field or the child development field have about content such as this. So that's the one thing. The other matter that I would like to speak about is the hate speech bill, the combating of hate crimes and hate speech bill. You might have heard of this. This is a bill that's currently on the president's desk. The last time I checked, it has not been signed into law. This bill is a big threat for the freedom of religious expression, particularly. The bottom line is that the reason why this bill is problematic is that while nobody is condoning true hate speech, and that in hate speech, as properly defined by the Constitution, is not protected speech, this bill goes a lot wider. It's arguably wider than the Equality Act, the Equality Act, which deals with civil hate speech. And without going into a lot of the legal detail, it's because you have a definition of hate speech that's very wide, and it's a criminal law. So the wider this net of this definition is, the more that's captured under it. So things that are legitimate expressions that should probably be protected, can be caught up into this net. And what this could lead to is that you are saying something based on your religious beliefs, on something such as sex and gender and marriage, and now it might be misconstrued as hate speech. Because this definition of hate speech, hatred is not defined. That's a quintessential element of this crime of hate speech, but hatred is not defined, despite the Kulani judgment that speaks to civil hate speech, having recommended saying, hatred should be this and that. It's not defined in this bill. Then it has a very wide definition of harm. It includes things such as emotional harm, that's very subjective. It includes social harm, which is defined as anything that undermines the social cohesion of South Africa. It's interesting that the unit in the Department of Basic Education that produced the ECE Toolkit is called the Social Cohesion Unit. So if you perhaps, what does this mean? We aren't just asking questions, what does this mean? So if you're not supporting certain views, are you now undermining social cohesion? The hate speech bill, the hate speech definition also has a lot of listed grounds on which you can commit hate speech, and the groups against whom you can commit hate speech. And it's a wide list. It's much wider than the Constitution's 4 grounds, and even if you add the 5th ground from Kwelani, it's much wider. It includes novel concepts, contested concepts, fluid concepts, such as gender expression and sex characteristics and gender identity, those things. So when you start putting all of this together, again, and nobody's condoning true hate speech, but it's where is the line of this bill? Because we don't want to criminalize legitimate religious expression, because freedom of religion and freedom of expression are cornerstone rights of any democracy. We don't want people to self-censor out of fear that they might be prosecuted. Even if it's a prosecution that goes away, there's a massive emotional cost to prosecution. We want a vibrant society that actually celebrates, as the Constitution says, unity in diversity, not unity in conformity. And then the hate speech bill has a religious exemption clause, but it's worded in such a circular way that it's actually very self-defeating. So in the end, you have a bill that is that's highly problematic, and that does not set the requisite threshold for hate speech. And we are concerned that what the bill then would criminalize, and the sentence, if you're found guilty of hate speech, is up to 5 years imprisonment, or a fine of undetermined amount. But we are concerned that what might be criminalized is not true hate speech, but speech that someone hates. And a big problem with any bill that has vague terms is a vague term in a law is open to subjective interpretation. Something that is open to subjective interpretation is open to arbitrary application, which means it's open to abuse. It can be abused. And if we look at what is happening overseas, we want to protect our democracy. We do not support unfair discrimination against any person. But we want to protect our democracy because, for example, in Finland, there's a member of parliament who is facing how many rounds of criminal trials. With each court, she gets found not guilty, but then it gets appealed, because she tweeted Bible verses. And we don't want that for South Africa. We cherish our democracy. We cherish the rich diversity of our people. But for that, we need freedom of religion. And freedom of religion is a very wide right in the Constitution. It includes secular worldviews as well. And we also need our freedom of expression. Thank you.
Well done.
Right, so we're not going to get questions now. I want you guys to hear everyone talk first, because you'll see how everything is directly related that way. And just sort of remember what Liesl has spoken about. We can always go back to it. But I want everyone to talk first before we get questions. So hold on to your questions, and we're going to have a massive Q&A as soon as everyone's finished speaking.
So I am not a lawyer. All of them has got legal background here. So I'm going to, I think how I would frame the BELA Bill and the discussion around it is to speak about the process of the bill, where the bill currently is. And one of the things that I just need to say, this has been a long, arduous fight against the Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill. And like you said, Vaughan, when you look at it at the face of it, at the legislation, you would say, what is the big fuss about? And I think all of the, like Liesl has spoken about the toolkit for early childhood development centers, and it is currently being piloted in 5 provinces, we should also add, and the consultations that she mentioned as well. We need to question how many people were involved in those consultations. So the reason I'm saying I'm not a lawyer is because I am highly political. So I would look at the political process and how things are done and what is the implication. 1, when people do not know. 2, when the process is not done effectively. And underlying what Liesl has also said is what is being presented, what is the ideology that is underneath it, and what is the worldview that is being entrenched into our culture. So we need to look at the Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill within that framework. The bill came before the National Assembly last year, and we went through a 10-month, it was really like a speedy process. And the reason why it was rushed in that way is because we are just before the elections, of course, on the 29th of May. And it is very clear that this legislation is one of the key priorities of the current governing party to pass before the 29th of May. And why? And how do we, now constitutionally, I think Steve is going to speak a lot about process as well as the technical aspects of legislation as it goes through the houses. But when it comes to legislation coming or lawmaking process, it starts within the committees. The bill gets tabled and it gets sent to the committee, and the committee sits with the legislation. So when I say we dealt with it for a 10-month period, that is the public hearing process of the BELA Bill. And when we started the process on the BELA Bill, I should say, one of the key things that we wanted to do was to engage with as many of our constituencies so that and raise awareness around the BELA Bill. So I said, what is the cell? What is it that we say we want to achieve, or that the governing party say they want to achieve with the BELA Bill? The way South Africans received this bill, or how it was communicated, is this BELA Bill is going to transform basic education. And everybody wants justice, and justice is access to education, it's having equality and having the opportunity and not being discriminated against. That is our path. And when the governing party, and I would say, am I allowed to be political here?
Yes.
Okay. So when
We could even be controversial.
because a politician asking, may I be political? Yeah, it's quite an irony.
Too nice.
Yeah. But so what is the sell to people when you look at our past, the fractured past of South Africa? And I'm speaking as a person, as a black person in South Africa. One of the key things in 1994 when we went to go and vote was that we wanted to be treated equally. We wanted equal opportunity in a just society. And that is a very strong value for us, right? So what the African National Congress does very well and has been an absolute seller in South Africa for 30 years is where we come from and how we want to transform our society. And the BELA Bill has been exactly that, sold like that to the people of South Africa. So in every public hearing you had people thinking, never reading the bill, never looking at the implication of the bill, because the education around the bill has been so poor. So when legislation has not been properly explained, when the lawmaking process is taking place, by the way, a key tenet of our constitution is that the lawmaking process is not one-sided. It is Parliament that deals with the bill, and then they need to go to the people. It's a participatory democracy. The public then needs to give the inputs into the bill. So that's the process and the cell, as I say. The cell has to do what is the belief, what is the ideology that underpins the legislation, right? And then how do they take it to the public? So we started with it, like I said, in last year, and it's the Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill. This bill has been in draft for a period of 10 years, I think, Christopher, for a period of 10 years, and in 2013 and in 2017 it was open for public comment. So you can see how long it is. In between that, in the 10 years, there's many things that has happened. You had COVID, you have the onset of online schools, you had all of that. Now, when you say you're going to transform or reform the education environment, you would think that everything that has happened in the last 10 years would then be considered when you go into a legislation like that. But it never did. So we have two aspects. It's either we are incompetently or dysfunctionally looking at legislation, or second, that actually we are not interested in better quality education. We are more interested in a specific agenda. That's a political statement. But so when we look at I want to read to people. I just need to quickly go back to what Liesl has spoken of the toolkit. It is important to understand it's not only the social cohesion unit. The BELA Bill is not separate. It is all of these, the legislation, the policy, the guidelines. These are all part of the framework, the policy direction that the department is taking. And it's also important for people to understand your government is in essence then saying to you what is important for them, how they want to govern or transform education, right? Very important in light of what she has said. The redefining of cultural norms, traditions, values, all of that. So when you look at that, in terms of the social cohesion unit, we have the BELA Bill that we're dealing with now, that is before the National Council of Provinces. This is the NCOP. And then we have the guidelines on it's a long word, on SOGI-YISC. Liesl is very familiar with this. It is sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, and sex characteristics. Both the BELA Bill and the SOGI's guidelines was brought before the committee within this last portion of the term, right? So people need to have that just as a picture of where we're going with this. The Social Cohesion Unit made a presentation during the period that we dealt with the bill, and it was very clear. This is what is being given or expressed, is that it's about human rights. It's about human rights. It's about enhancing and fighting for human rights. When you look at the words that they use, is words like, and I'm talking about the SOGI's sexual orientation guidelines, is the word ally, for instance. And anybody who's not an ally, how do you treat them? Okay. So I think I'm putting that together to say that we've got the guidelines, we have the BELA Bill, and then there's another document that I want to add. It is the learner pregnancy policy that was passed in 2021 in December, right? All of these things have one thing in common. It's within the education environment. And who are the most important stakeholders in that environment? It is the parents and the communities that are being served. Now, I'm going to read to people just very quickly what is before, if I have an opportunity, I can speak about the other implications of the bill. But when you look at the Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill and the intention of the bill, it says it is to amend the South African Schools Act of 1996, to insert and amend certain definitions, and to provide that attendance of grade R is compulsory. I'm just going to quickly stop at that. When we say we're going to make grade R compulsory, on who does that have an impact? On our ECD sector, right? So in the government's eye, how does the reform and transformation of education look like? That's the question we should ask. How does it look like? Clearly, it looks this way. We will take ECD and we will make it part of the primary school system, right? And that has implications, obviously, for the independent education ECD sector. And remember, ECD is the largest sector that within our township economy. It's women-owned. It is mainly black-owned and black-managed. So what happens when government takes over a function that is part of a free enterprise? You call it nationalization. I don't have enough time to go into all of it, but so that's the one. Then the second is to amend the penalty provision in the case where the parent of a learner or any other person without just cause prevent a learner who is subject to compulsory attendance from attending school. So what we are saying is, if you don't take your child to school, you will be penalized. I don't know if Christopher would be able to speak, because they've actually done a great job of giving a research document to the committee on this very aspect. What is government saying? Now remember who the government is that's speaking. It is a government that says that we have liberated, we are pro-poor, we have a pro-poor agenda. It's the same government that's actually saying, if you don't take your child to school, you will go to jail for a period of a year. All right? So who are we talking to? Who are the people most affected by absenteeism in schools? It is the poor. Yeah. It is the marginalized. It's people that for various social reasons cannot send their children to school. And I should say that in terms of that, the ACDP absolutely rejected. We rejected the bill in its entirety, but in terms of, and I hope Christopher speaks a little bit about the research that they've done in terms of, does it actually work to put parents in jail? And what is the implication? Remember now, we're talking about parental rights. If you take a parent and you take a parent to jail, is it in the best interest of the child? How does the child's wellness get affected by you putting a parent into jail? In a South Africa, where we have an unemployment rate that's almost close to 40%, where most people are living below half of South Africa, 18 million of them are living on grants, right? So we know that for most parents, the reality of hunger is real. The reality of mental depression is real. The reality of violence is real. So when children stay out of school, these factors are at the core of it. So we say we will send them there. We don't have enough time for me to go, but I think I'm following Liesl's example of just give a definition of what the intention is and in what environment it happens. Then it says, and it says it will actually take people to jail who disrupt school. I laughed at this because somebody sent me a message while we were busy with the bill to say, can you ask them if they would take the taxi drivers who disrupted school for a period of 2 weeks if they are putting them in jail? And the answer is no, you wouldn't. They wouldn't do it. Why? It's politically not expedient for them to do it. Here is the parts that I want people to pay attention that I think you spoke about gender affirming care and earlier with us. It says that this one has to do with school governing bodies more than anything. It is to enhance the authority of the head of the department in relation to the admission of a learner to a public school after consulting with the governing body of the school, to provide that the governing body of a public school must submit the admission and language policies of the public school to the head of the department. What does it mean? You give government more control. Yeah. The whole BELA Bill is about giving government more control. Then it says to provide for some, that's a good thing for South African Sign Language. But here is what I want to underline. I'm not going to take the whole intention. This is what it says. To provide the minister with the authority to appoint a person, an organization or a group of persons to advise on curriculum, assessment-related matters, to provide that the code of conduct of a public school must take into account the diverse cultural beliefs, religious observances, and medical circumstances of learners at the school, and to provide for the inclusion of an exemption clause in the code of conduct and for disciplinary proceedings to be dealt with in an appropriate manner. Why are we having that there? That is the question we should also ask. Medical treatment, code of the uniform of the school. I'll end off with this one to underline again. We also had the Human Rights Commission coming to us to do a submission on learner uniforms, the uniform of learners. I, in my constituency, cannot get the Human Rights Commission to come out to a farm where people don't have water. They are coming out to do a committee presentation on learner uniform. Why is learner uniform so important? Because, obviously, we know there's a case now, Beaumont School, where if a learner identifies a certain gender, that learner must be treated, dressed in that gender. So what is the BELA Bill? The BELA Bill is more of the same policies and legislation to undermine parental rights and restrict and limit the freedoms of people to decide on the education of their children.
That's very good.
For those that were here last week, you saw a little bit of the videos that I showed you guys of what happened in a couple of the elementary schools in South Africa when they had a gender swap day. And that was, yes, that was frightening. Because for me, I couldn't tell which were boys and which were girls. Even though I knew that they'd swapped clothes, it was so neutral. And it was so accepted, and so they actually rejoiced in it. I don't know how this happens, and the scary thing is, Maury, this wasn't in affluent schools where they were having the gender swap days. The classrooms were falling apart. They were rural schools that were worried about gender and not about the classrooms falling apart or anything like that, but they were dressing up in each other's clothing and coming to school and playing games. Even the teachers were dressing up. It was crazy. But let's listen to what Christopher has to say.
Thanks very much, Ron. I suppose what I wanted to say is that most of you maybe, or some of you maybe have seen that I was working on my speech just before we started speaking. And I'm very glad today that I've got, or this evening that I've got Steve here, and that he's the chief whip of the ACDP. Because let me tell you, I've written this, I'm sick and tired of rewriting my speech. Okay? Because, and the chief culprit here is this lady to my right. And every time I start my speech and I say, now that the BELA Bill, and you can, there's a whole lot of like options you can fill in, I've got a drop down menu, has passed through the committee, is going through public, whatever. That's how I sort of start the speech, and I say, then we can now talk about, the other changes that we'd like to see, or what the real BELA Bill should be. Now, every time I start the speech, I do that. About 10 minutes before I speak, someone phones me and says, Maury says something new has happened on the BELA Bill. The BELA Bill is being held up in some way. Now, I'm getting quite sick of it. I'm appealing to Honourable Swart to crack the whip, to bring order, to bring Honourable Sukers in line. I want us to stop this BELA Bill stuff. I want to move on. So what I want to do today is like they're doing like the American Senate. I want to yield a few of my minutes back to Honourable Sukers because once again, she has ruined my speech. So Honourable Sukers, please tell us before I go into the history of the BELA Bill, before I go into what the BELA Bill should be, and before I go into how we work politically, and I'll use a slightly broader definition of that word than party politically, how we all have to work to make the real BELA Bill that we need, I'm going to ask you to tell us, once again, how you've ruined my speech.
Yeah, so what Christopher is referring to, of course, is that I spoke about the process, and it was in the National Assembly, it's now in the National Council of Provinces, and they would have voted today on the BELA Bill, and we were all ready and armed for that. And this morning I put on Twitter, God will part the Red Sea. And I absolutely believe he will.
But it happened.
The National Council of Provinces today did not vote on the bill. The bill was referred back to the committee, and the vote will take place, according to them, next week on the 16th of May. For technical reasons, they did not vote on the bill. And it is going to be very interesting to see how the next coming week is going to look like. And I think Steve, in this case, needs to give us some kind of an idea. What does this mean in terms
pressure.
What does this mean in terms of timeline? So the NCOP did not vote on the bill. It was, the bill was it was taken off for voting for technical reasons. Now, yeah.
Don't clap. So let me, almost working backwards, what I want to talk about really is, well, I'll mention it backwards and I'll talk about it hopefully forwards, is that I'm going to end up by speaking about what we have to do politically to bring about change. And it's change not only in education, because I think the model is applicable to whatever area we're talking about. Then I'm going to say what the BELA Bill should be, what the real BELA Bill should be, and I'm going to start off with a bit of a history of the BELA Bill. Mm-hmm. So Honourable Sukers has told us already, the BELA Bill is already 10 years old. And in that process, and one of the things that I want to really emphasize is that what we need is reform about how we make policy. Liesl has spoken about the white paper and how it's essentially just, it's on the white paper and let's just throw that white paper out and now. That was then, this is now. So this is what we really need fundamentally is policy reform. It's how do we bring it about. Now, the BELA Bill started 10 years ago, Honourable Sukers mentioned it. In those 10 years, it's become the omnibus jump on the bus bill. So it's become a bill that's got virtually everything in it. Sometimes I actually think that's what happened with the BELA Bill is that different government departments, someone had like a little, was taking like a lunch order at the department, and they were like going around and they were saying, so what you can have, what do you want in the bill? No, I'll have this in the bill. And then they go to the next, no, I'll have that in the bill, and I'll have that, but just take that off, and no, just sugar-free Coke only, please. So it's like they almost had this, it's like a shopping list. It truly is, it's a shopping list bill. Yeah. Some people say Frankenstein bill, but it's a shopping list bill. It's got all these weird pieces in it that don't work together. And that's one of the fundamental problems of the bill. And literally, the longer it took, the more lunch orders got put onto the bill, right? And so that was really the fundamental flaw of the bill over the about, 8 years that it took to get to Parliament. I've heard some strange stories, Department of officials really quoting nonsense stories. The bill, actually, public comment was on the bill in 2017, and people made very, I think, incisive comments, and people were actually really asking the Parliament, work with us, fix this bill. There are important things that need to be changed in education. And this is this will be, there's a little bit of foreshadowing here, but I'll give you some sense of why politics is important, why political parties are important, even if they're not in the majority. Because this bill progressed through. It came, and to be quite frank, at that stage, some political parties obviously made submissions, but in general it was the public engaging with the DBE. And then what happened is the bill eventually, as Honourable Sukers said, got to Parliament. The ACDP has been very active. Starting in 2013, I should also mention ex-parliamentarian Sherilyn Dudley, who at that stage already spoke on 2013, was asking the minister, well, when are you going to actually, I hear this wonderful bill is coming, but when are you going to actually, like maybe engage with the public about it, and particularly with the homeschoolers? In 2017, I think it was on the 28th of October or 28th of November, actually. And once again, I think Honourable Dudley at that stage made a very important point. She said to the committee, it's very prophetic, she said to the committee, are you going to listen to the public, or are you just going to run a process which will end up in the bill facing a legal challenge and being struck down? And then we have to go back to the drawing board, and Parliament will have to pay costs. That was when you had a Parliament building. We weren't paying for Parliament buildings at that stage to be rebuilt. So Parliament then had financial problems. But I really want to come to one of the key moments that's relevant to what you're saying today, and the value of having parliamentarians who know what's happening on a bill and fighting, even if it's one voice or two voices. And I can also say, and I'll come to this point when I talk about politics, is that one person can do a lot. Steve will know very well that once you understand your rules, 2 people can do more, and 3 people can do more. And each parliamentarian you add, it goes up exponentially, the impact you can have. And so one of the key factors and one of the key reasons we have this problem now was when this bill was put through, when the committee report was first written, 9,005, and this was a few months ago, I think September, October-ish, 9,000 last year, 9,500 submissions were left out. The committee basically said, we have something, a statistically relevant sample or something, we don't need to count, we don't need to go through everyone's submissions. Honourable Sukers was one of the people who fought that issue in the committee. The committee then had to go back and get those 9,500 submissions processed. The issue there is that took 3 weeks. 3 critical weeks, which I think Steve will speak to about what could possibly happen now because of that. But I can tell you that if those 3 weeks had come out of the process and we were 3 weeks more advanced in the process now, we wouldn't be in the situation today where it looks like a critical mistake has been made in the processing of the bill that's going to delay it further. So I want to just emphasize there that point about how critical having competent parliamentarians in the House who are going to carry your agenda. Then I think we know, I think Steve will speak a little bit more about where the bill is in danger now at the moment, but this billable process has been, quite frankly, a disaster. It's been a very poor process. It has, unfortunately, people have spoken multiple times and warned about why this process is flawed. As the process went into the NCOP, It was evident there that there have been significant problems with how the bill was processed, the warnings of the past coming back, and this desire just to push the bill through irrespective of what happens. It got so bad in one case in Gauteng, the public were told that children can't make a submission on the bill, and that's completely unconstitutional. So
Mistake.
the reality is that, and I can say this because I'm a legal strategist, I'm not a lawyer, because if you ask a lawyer, they'll always tell you, I can't tell you anything about how your case is going to go. But I can tell you there's a very high chance that, a very significant chance, that this bill will be struck down for procedural flaws. The very warning made in the House in 2017, in November, I sat there that day, or in the committee chamber, I sat there that day, is now 5 years later coming to fruition because the government did not listen. And I hope the ANC is listening. Hello, tick, 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 I won't ring. I hope the ANC is listening, because this BELA Bill is like becoming like a haunted house. It's like one of these horror stories, okay? It's like that horror story where they like the friends go to the house for the first time on the first evening, right? And then something spooky happens, okay? And then they go, oh no, we mustn't go in the house. Good move. Second time, they go and try, and something even spooky happens, and then they run away. This is now like the third time, guys. Hello, ANC. This is like the third time, guys. I'm giving you a warning. This does not end well. Okay. The one kid is gonna run away and come back and have to save you at the end. Don't go back into the haunted house. Let the bill die now, please. So let me say a little bit. So if this bill dies, which it should, and I'm saying, do not go back into the haunted house. The issue is there are real challenges in the education system. Honourable Sukers with Honourable Matric from the ANC, made a very clear point in the committee. Honourable Sukers said she had to fit Engels to get her children into quality education in the Western Cape. There is a fundamental problem there. There is a fundamental problem in the ECD sector, the way that it's been treated. The committee agreed to actually put ECD into the bill. They said, I wouldn't say the committee said this as a whole, but certainly the implication of putting ECD into the bill was, we're going to have to wait a little bit, give it a year, maybe a year and a half, let's work ECD in so we have a holistic solution. It went into the bill and it just mysteriously disappeared out of the bill. So there are a number of fundamental challenges. And because this bill took 10 years, all sorts of things happened. COVID happened. We have seen the emergence, what we call the emerging educational modalities, new ways of conducting education. The fundamental reality is that we cannot, in South Africa, and this is what the BELA Bill should be addressing, or this is what a BELA Bill should be addressing, a true, not a schools bill, a true education bill should be addressing, is it should be saying, how do we get education, how do we get education into our country? And we cannot do it in the traditional way. We just don't have the money. And things are not going to get better, even fiscally. Even if fiscally things stay the same or get a bit better, there are fundamental drivers that are not going to get better. One of those fundamental drivers is that over the next 10 years, 50%, 1 in every 2 of our teachers is going to retire. We already have 70 kids in a classroom. We already have 120 kids in a classroom. How are we going to do that unless we fundamentally change our education system now? It's already too late in a way. And that is the fundament, and a lot of this nonsense and we're getting a lot of nonsense on the BELA Bill. People are not taking the simple facts that people are putting forward to them and saying, you know what, you've got a point. Let's just listen and let's just actually get that sorted out so that we can get to these fundamental issues that are critical. That is not happening, and this is a looming crisis. The crisis The crisis was hidden about a year ago. The crisis is emerging right now in the Western Cape, in Gauteng, in many places. We are seeing teachers are leaving the profession because they are retiring. And there's this kind of weird dream out there that somehow they'll just replace all those teachers. It's not, that's fundamental, it's not going to happen. So these are the things that we need to be addressing with the Real BELA Bill, with a new bill, in fact, not even a new bill, a new stable of legislation that looks at how we reform the South African education system. That's fundamental. Now, how do we get there? Because that's like a bit of a pipe dream, without having a process to get there. And this is particularly where I want to speak about politics, but politics within two senses. When I came in this evening, I made a bit of a joke. I said, given the ACDP people that I see all around me, I said, like they say on BBC, other brands are available. Because you have to sort of do that on a public broadcast. Yes. But and then Honourable Sukers said, but not recommended. But that's an issue I'll leave to you. But the fundamental issue here is we need to start thinking and looking about politics we need to be very focused in the narrow sense of political politics, but we also need to be looking about politics as an ongoing process in which we are all engaged. Why has the Pezelozzi Trust been able to conduct one of the most critical and successful fights against, the most critical and successful fight against a bill in the history of the democratic South Africa, and to be quite frank, in the history of South Africa as a whole? Perhaps maybe one of the only ones I can remember that ultimately failed was the coloured voters roll case back in the 50s. The reason is that an organisation, a public organisation, was established 25 years ago to work on that, to gather funds, to be able to fight for this battle 25 years into the future. That's what each and every one of us needs to be doing. We need to be creating new kinds of political, in the broader sense of the word, organizations that can work with political parties and say, how do we get the legislation that we want? How do we get the legislation that we need? And I think the issue is, and that starts with us developing political literacy and political knowledge. Now, Honourable Sukers, I don't think I would be lying if I said, as a typical MP, when you came to Parliament, you knew very little about parliamentary process. Doesn't apply to Honourable Swart, because of course he almost built the house. So he knows where all the plumbing is and all the electricity.
I still had to learn that.
Yeah, but the point is, our government believes, or our government would like us to believe, that they can educate everything into you. That teenage hormones can be controlled through a little bit of education somehow, through some miracle. Everything can be taught. If you ever go and look at how many Matric subjects there are, it's like this unending list. I mean, and I've got no disrespect, it's Tamil, it's Naidu, it's Tamil, it's Hindi, it's Mandarin, there is marine management, marine this. There's like 800 subjects. There's one subject that is not taught in the South African curriculum. One subject that seems almost unteachable. Civics. We don't teach people how politics works. We don't teach people how a bill gets passed. I think one of the great things that we can take out of the BELA Bill is that so many more people, and now we see it across these groups, we have people saying, ordinary members of the public, moms, dads, going, has the C version of the bill been put on the government? Is this the C or D version of the bill? So there's
It's amazing.
So it's amazing. There's been a huge growth in knowledge, self-learned knowledge. But that is something that we need to take on board. And then form organizations and then form alliances with political parties that will support what your organization is doing, wherever it is across the political spectrum. Our organization is a party political, not apolitical, a party political. And I can tell you, every party has a point. The EFF, people may hate it, but the EFF has a point, right? I don't think they've got the solution, but they do have a point. And we have to hear, that's the wonderful thing about South Africa, we have to hear that diversity, where we understand, this is my pain, this is my problem, this is what's happening in my community. And it's different for every community. But the reality of the situation, and as I say, I don't agree with all the solutions, but as organizations, as people working together, form organizations, follow the example that the Pezelozzi Trust has set for homeschoolers, and form an organization, start raising funds. Steve is, well, I'll say this because this is the upcoming years, and I can make a prediction. The upcoming 5 years is the years of the lawyers. It's going to be a very good time to be a lawyer, because what's happening at the moment is a whole lot of legislation is being rushed through. It's all going to be struck down.
Yes.
And it's all highly likely to be struck down, and we're going to go back to step one and we're going to start again. It is sad, it's a huge waste of money, but I think it's a good learning curve. And what we need to do is the fundamental thing we need to do to not have this happen again is policy reform. And we have to do something, and I'm not saying policy reform, I'm saying reform of how we actually make policy, and that we begin to involve the public. And the way to do that, and this is not rocket science, this is very simple. You can't solve downstream problems. It's very expensive to solve downstream problems downstream. The BELA Bill is now at the end of its life, and it's got so many problems because those problems were not addressed upstream. And what we need is we need a policy process that mimics a project management process, and a very simple process of identifying. One, what is the problem? Is this a real problem? Is gender identity in schools a real problem? Let's find that out. Then let's look at, and then get the public involved at that stage, not where right at the end of the process you say, do you have any thoughts on this? We've thought everything through. So you start there. You say, identify the problem, develop alternative solutions. Let's honestly look at all the solutions on the table. And then after that, let's look at, and then we begin looking at implementation. Let's craft the legislation and write it in the right way, so that we're not doing what people are doing at the moment on the BELA Bill and have been doing. We're kind of, the lawyers are fixing it as the car is riding along, right? Let's not do that, and then let's pass that bill. And at each of those stages, and I'm going to use a very technical legal term, we need to make this process justiciable. We need to be able for people to say, in the problem identification process, when we were there at my village and they said you have to build a bridge, we said that's not the solution, we want boats, okay? And this is the reason we want boats. And we can't wait until that process comes to the end. We have to at that stage say, okay, now I'm going to court, guys, because we said boats, you say bridges, let's go to the third party. Now, and this is one of the fun, if you go into our constitutional law textbooks, you'll see our constitutional law textbooks talk about exactly this, public engagement, a meaningful public engagement. We have meaningful public engagement, we should, in Parliament, where public gets the opportunity to comment on the bills. That's legislative, because we have three branches of government, the legislative, the judicial. Now, even in the judicial, we have a degree of public engagement where lay assessors sit with the judges. And this is a very fundamental, and I think to some extent, Steve must probably correct me here, but a very fundamental and unique part of South African society, because of our history of the public being pushed away from governmental processes. But the textbooks all say we have not yet worked out how the executive, so the government, the presidency in a sense in one way, but the executive have public participation. And I argue that this reform of the policy-making process is one of the very, very critical reforms that we need, maybe not in the next 5 years. I don't think there'll maybe be people wanting to push that through, but possibly. It all depends how we vote on the 29th. But this is one of the critical issues that we need to reform, and it cuts across, whether it's BELA Bill, whether it's building bridges, whether it's anything. We need to get the public involved, and we need the public to be able to say, okay, thank you very much. When you form these organizations that are able to enforce the law, you say, no, you say bridges, we say boats, Let the third party decide. Thanks.
Awesome stuff.
Well, to follow on those speeches is quite a task. But allow the chief whip now. And Vaughan, you'll have to be the honourable speaker as far as time is allocation. But Liesl, I just want to honour you and thank you for the work that you do at FORSA. And Christopher, you know, just your input as well, just to focus on the point they made about civil society and the key role that they play. And I just want to really acknowledge both of your organisations. At the end of the day, it's us at the top, the MPs, and the work that civil society does. And I'll give you an example with FORSA when we did the domestic violence bill. Remember, Liesl? And in the domestic violence bill, there was a clause about spiritual abuse. Now, you can imagine how broad that is, Christopher. Spiritual abuse, what is that? So you're having a debate as to which church you should go to or which doctrine, and it's spiritual abuse. Be arrested, domestic violence. And the committee asked me, this is the Justice Committee, and I said, I've got a problem with that definition. And they said, well, Steve, Honourable Swart, please give us a suggestion. So I'm under such pressure, I phoned FORSA, and we quickly worked on a definition of spiritual abuse that was acceptable to us. Civil society drafted it, I presented it. The committee accepted it unanimously. EFF as well. So it shows you the partnership that we can. But I do want to make this one point. When it comes to elections, it's key for civil society to say, these are the guys that have been supporting us.
Yes.
It's very important.
It's a very important point.
And I can't emphasize this enough. I appreciate we're all apolitical. It's like churches are saying, we're apolitical, but we're standing for the kingdom values.
Yes.
We're standing for the kingdom values. Why aren't we allowed to speak in churches? No, we're apolitical. But Zuma's allowed, Malema's allowed in the churches.
Yes.
You understand? So I just want to challenge you in this regard. Because when it comes to the BELA Bill, the BELA Bill in Parliament is known as the Mari Bellable Sukers Bill. And I want to honour her because she has been such a thorn in the ANC's flesh. From the word go, give her a round of I have never seen an MP operate with such passion. One person. We are 4. We are 1% as the ACDP. But she's got all those ANC members hopping up and down whenever she speaks. And we need your support to get back into Parliament and to improve. Just think if we had double our numbers. So Mari's first speech was on agenda issue. Do you remember that? Her first speech in Parliament, where you're not supposed to be interjected. It's her maiden speech. I suppose now you can't even say maiden speech with binary language. It was her they speech, which I reject totally. And the ANC thought they'd intimidate her, and they interjected her. Well, she took them on. Maury, remember, he said, how dare you speak? This is gender violence. How dare you interrupt me? That speech had 1 million views. Maury for president. I mean, this is the quality of candidates the ACDP presents. But let me just tell you something now on public participation. Today I walked through the burnt down Parliament, and today Parliament was handed over to the demolition squads, the construction squads for the new Parliament. The design of the new Parliament, you'll see on all the media tomorrow, is based on Lachotla, on a tree, meeting under a tree to consult the public. What a joke. What a joke. How dare the ANC say that that's what they do when we know with public participation it is a tick box exercise and they don't listen to the people. And Christopher, we go right back to the abortion bill when there were hundreds of thousands of pieces of submissions ignored. All these pieces of legislation that are sensitive agenda issues, sexual orientation. There's an agenda that's coming right through from the top, and it's a tick box exercise. And we need to be aware that. But, Christopher, it gives the lawyers time to strategize, to take it to court, and to win in court. Because I agree with you. I agree with you. This BELA Bill is not going to fly. But where is it now? So it's in the second House of Parliament. It went through the National Assembly where we served, the committee, where Maury caused them grey hairs, absolute grey hairs. And many of them are resigning and not standing again in Parliament because they don't want to face Maury in the next Parliament.
You are very kind.
It was then passed. We voted against it. The ANC used its majority. It went to the NCOP. Again, purported public hearings were held. Again, a whole string of deficiencies, technical problems that the lawyers are all picking up, and we are all picking up as well, for later litigation. And then today, it was supposed to be voted on in the National Council of Provinces, because next week, the National Assembly has got an urgent sitting, and it's on our order paper already. It's on our order paper already to consider it. So, next Thursday. But what happens today? Maury prays, God intervenes, and they make a technical fault and they don't file the correct bill. Can you believe it? They've been working on this for 10 years. Well, how long?
10 years.
At the last moment, the last week or 2 weeks of Parliament, that poor guy that made that technical error in Parliament, I mean, he's in Western, the Parliament's burnt down. Because this is crucial for the agenda.
For the agenda.
Crucial. And now they're going to have a special sitting of Parliament, which is the NCP sitting, which is when? Next week, Thursday, when we're supposed to be dealing with the bill. The process is, I cannot see how it's going to be completed. They're going to try and push it through. So the NCP has to have a sitting. They're supposed to have it today. Then it gets back to us. So the plan was to then push it through the National Assembly next Thursday. Now they can't do it. They can only meet next Thursday when we're supposed to finalize it. If it's not finalized, then Rule 30, is it 333 or 33? 333 of Parliament. Ask Mongezi, he knows the rules better than I do. The bill lapses. The bill lapses. The bill lapses. Is that not encouraging? Now, it's interesting, what it says is it lapses at the end of the day, of that day, unless Assembly decides otherwise. Now, there's a big legal debate, and that could be quite litigation. At what point does the Assembly decide otherwise? I would always think it was now. When the bill lapses, you say, well, we're now saying it'll be revived. But how it's been interpreted, the new Parliament then passes a resolution to revive all the old pieces of legislation. And it decides at what point that legislation will continue. Whether it has to have re-hearings, whether it starts in the middle, wherever it is. And so I've got to be careful what I say, but I strongly suspect that it's going to lapse. Or that the ANC calls a special sitting of the National Assembly in the next week. Want, vriende, wie praat Afrikaans hierso? Want benoude katte maak benoude spronge. Nee. Do you know what that means? A cat on a hot tin roof. And the people that are funding this bill and funding the ANC and funding them are saying, why is this bill not passed? You've had 10 years. So friends, this is a great victory, and I want to honor Maury. I want to honor the colleagues that have been working on this because it's a great success. But let me just get quickly to the issue of the agendas and quickly speak, because I've only got another half an hour, about the issue relating to the World Health Organization, which is part of the agenda formers. And I'm not going to get into the whole debate around the vaccinations and the pro. All I can say is from the ACDP's perspective, we were opposed to mandatory vaccinations, COVID-19 vaccinations. And we took a number of court cases. We defended a lot of employees that were fired. And let me quickly give you an example. A student of the University of Western Cape, a final year dental student, could not medically be vaccinated. He could not register at the University of the Western Cape to do his final year because he couldn't be vaccinated and he wasn't vaccinated. Nobody would help him except for the ACDP. and we got medical evidence, we briefed lawyers, it cost us a lot of money, and we succeeded in forcing the university to admit that student who is now a qualified dentist. Is that not great? Yes. Isn't God good? So when it comes to those issues, we engaged in a lot of litigation around like ivermectin. It's one of the best drugs around. Just let doctors prescribe it. Why was it banned? Cost us millions of rands. We got a court order by consent that ivermectin can be prescribed. The lockdown, friends. The lockdown. Jonathan, CCFM. What happened there in Muizenberg on the promenade? A dad is walking along the promenade in the lockdown. He's allowed to walk on the cement promenade, but not on this beach. Okay? He's allowed to walk on the promenade with his wife, with a baby, and a little toddler. The toddler gets away from the dad and runs onto the beach. Major drama. The dad quickly goes, because it's now a crime,
That's ridiculous.
quickly grabs the little toddler. No, come back, and he's on the beach. Jy's op die strand, meneer. He's arrested with his whole family. He's arrested. Ludicrous.
That's famous, yeah.
Ludicrous. The police are all on the beaches, keeping people off the beaches while there's such crime in our communities at that time. It's disgraceful. And the army's even called in to keep people off the beaches. How did we ever accept that? How did we ever accept that? Now, Christopher will know that there's a term, de miribus non curat lex, which means the law does not involve itself with trivialities. But more than, how many people do you think were arrested in that time? More than 400,000 people were arrested. One of the best pictures, my sons are graduates, and I'm so proud of them. They've graduates, they've got degrees, professions. The proudest picture I've got of them is not of their graduation, but of them being water cannoned by the police outside Parliament for demonstrating against the lockdowns. Courage, 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 courage. I'm not promoting lawlessness, but sometimes it's a time to stand up for what is right. Now, why am I raising that now? Because something significant is happening on the 29th of May. What is happening on the 29th of May? No, it's not what you're thinking. The World Health Organization will be meeting to pass the pandemic treaty and the amendments to the international health regulations that will have a severe impact on the national sovereignty of countries when it comes to your public health. And that is the agenda. Thankfully, African countries have come and tried to block it. And there's been a lot of amendments. But this pandemic treaty is to try to bring everyone, as it was a lockdown, the whole world locks down, except for a few countries that didn't. Sweden. They just continued. To bring everyone into line with the agenda. To prepare for the next lockdown. And don't think it's not going to happen, because part of the agenda with all these issues is a worldwide agenda. And so let me just quickly tell you this, because nobody in South Africa knows this is happening. Except that the ACDP led a debate in Parliament on this issue. We led a debate in Parliament. We highlighted the dangers, because the executive, they're the ones that negotiate international relations, and then in 2 or 3 years' time they'll come back to Parliament and they'll say ratify it. And in my 25 years, Parliament has never changed a treaty. Never. Because it's too late, basically. And the amendment to the international health regulations is amendments of a treaty that has already gone through Parliament. So I don't even know if it's going to come through Parliament. But nobody's even talking about this. Why is it such a concern? Because what we know is now, what we know is our government was bullied into signing these COVID-19 treaties. And the contracts with Western pharmaceutical companies, they now know, they have admitted the long-term effects and efficacy of the vaccines are not currently known, and there may be adverse effects. That's what our government signed into. Forget about the litigation on this. The adverse reactions is vast through our countries, vast. And we are continuing to help people with those adverse reactions. But the part of this amendment, there are 3 points why this is so important. The new articles, firstly, were up to now international treaties were always non-binding. You could, and it was recommendations. Now there is a clause which is still being negotiated. We're hoping it's going to be removed, but that the words non-binding will be inserted, will be taken out. In fact, they will be binding. But what is even more so is clause 13a says member states will undertake to follow the World Health Organization's recommendations, not as just recommendations, but as the new coordinating authority of international public health response. That's the role they're assuming. An unelected body beholden to Bill Gates and company. What is even more concerning is that clause 42 says that state parties undertake to what were previously merely recommendations to implement them without delay, including on the private sector. So this is very far-reaching, and what we did when we raised this, because it talks about take measures to ensure non-state actors operating in their territories comply with the measures. That's you, that's civil society. Non-state actors, private businesses, charities, churches will comply with these regulations. We will not allow this to happen. We will not allow this. We've raised it in Parliament, and we're going to ensure that this treaty, the pandemic treaty, must come back to Parliament, and we will ensure that we meet under a tree and have public consultation on this.
Very good.
That we meet under a tree. They're going to build Parliament under a tree, make it look like under a tree, and that there's proper public consultation where the public can come and share their concerns, share their adverse reactions, share that they were fired. This is what we undertake to do with this pandemic treaty. But the challenge legally, Christopher, is this amendment to the international health regulations. We were not sure it's going to come back to Parliament at all, because some of the amendments to that have already kicked into law. And that is a massive challenge in terms of international law. But let me tell you, I asked you the question about how many people were arrested during the lockdown. 400,000 on trivial offences. But thankfully, the ACDP is around in Parliament. And thankfully, the ACDP's member on the Justice Committee is the most senior member on the Justice Committee. He's been there a few years. And thankfully, we understand the biblical concept of being salt and light and influence. And when I raised it in the committee, I said, Chairperson, have you thought about the 400,000 people that have been arrested? And many of them have paid an admission of guilt fine. Christopher, what does that mean? Once you pay an admission of guilt fine, you've got a criminal record.
Yeah.
Most of those people will not be able to get jobs. Most of those people will not be able to travel internationally. You will not qualify for a visa because you've got to, have you got a criminal record? For a trivial offense of not putting on a mask or the beach issue. But thankfully, the ACDP came through the help of God with his wisdom, and we persuaded the committee to change the law. And we changed the law with the Judicial Matters Amendment Bill. Doesn't that sound so great? And the Judicial Matters Bill is changing the Criminal Procedure Act that all those people that got criminal records can apply to have them expunged. Isn't that a lovely word? Expunged. Dit beteken verwyder. Removed. Dit bestaan nie weer nie. But just think if we weren't there. Just think if we weren't there. One of the few voices speaking out against this World Health Organization agenda. And I think, friends, it's very important for us to realize the significance of this little band. 4 of us. How many was it with Daniel? 4. The 4 of us that we've taken on these moral issues for many years, for 30 years odd.
30 years.
30 years, and what we've stopped. And I'm going to start concluding. I see I've only got another half an hour. But it's so important for us to understand. When the Constitution was written, Christopher, there was an attempt to have a clause inserted into the Constitution that South Africa is a secular state. Now, because our Constitution is largely based on the Canadian and the American model, that would have resulted in the strict separation of state and church within the political realm. We understand the separation as spheres of society. But you would not have prayers in any school. You would not have churches meeting in schools, like Mongezi in many places. You wouldn't be able to have that. If you go down to the gardens here in Cape Town, there's a beautiful statue of Jesus saying, "Come to me, and when you want to drink water, and I will give you water." It's a beautiful scripture, the water of life. In a public place, you wouldn't be able to have that, according to the American model. Thankfully, the ACDP then, under the leadership of Reverend Kenneth Meshwe, organized 50,000 people to march on Parliament under the banner of the Christian voice. Government backed down. They removed that voice, that clause. And in addition, we insisted on the insertion in Article 15 of a clause, which is the Religious Freedom Clause, that religious observances can be held in state institutions. That's phenomenal. We are not a secular state. We are not a secular state. The courts have even admitted that in the OGOD case, Randhart Primary School, that South Africa is not a secular state. So that is, we can build on our Judeo-Christian heritage and oppose these issues. And I'm appalled, Liesl, that a child that does not have the cognitive development to get a driver's license, to buy cigarettes, to buy alcohol, to vote, can decide on it's his or her, I use the word his or her, gender. A child does not have the cognitive development to do that. It's contrary to every tenet of law we've ever learned. It's disgraceful. So one last point, another successful point was the attempt to legalize, I'll call it what it is, legalize prostitution.
Yeah.
After we had, over many years, developed the Sexual Offences and Related Matters Amendment Bill, which is a great bill. It took us a long time to tighten up the laws around sexual offences. And we decided not to remove the criminalisation of prostitution, but also to criminalise the clients. On the 30th of November 2022, Cabinet approved the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Amendment Bill to totally decriminalise prostitution. At a time when our immorality is at such a high level of our country, to totally decriminalise it. Contrary to the African Charter of Human Rights, contrary to our legal cases, the Constitutional Court, Jordan versus the State, which found that the criminalisation of prostitution was a constitutionally permissible legislative choice. The Constitutional Court discussed morality even in that case, contrary to the SA Law Reform Commission's report that said various options which was not decriminalised. I believe in restorative justice. I've pioneered that. My heart goes out to women that are forced into prostitution for economic reasons. A restorative justice approach of programs and helping them out of prostitution with economic growth, with job opportunities. Ignored, totally ignored. And they had the gall, the ANC government, to just bring out almost a one-clause bill to decriminalise it without anything of how you're going to regulate it. Now you decriminalise it, but how are you going to regulate this prostitution? Here's our submission, 30th of January 2023. What we've seen in countries where you have legalization, it links to drugs, it links to criminal syndicates, and results in a demoralization of your society, where a husband who might say, oh, well, I feel I'm not going to do it now, but now it's lawful, now I can do it. Breaking down our moral fiber once again. The agenda again, breaking down families, breaking down your Judeo-Christian ethics. And I was absolutely appalled at this, because women then become expendable as objects. And it is contrary to everything. And the civil society, Christopher, the civil society, Collective Against Sexual Exploitation, they came up with evidence. They say this creates a facade of legitimacy, hiding behind criminal syndicates. And one survivor said to be prostituted is humiliating enough. To legalize it is to condone that humiliation. And to absolve those who inflict it. It is an agonizing insult. That's from a prostitute herself. But thankfully, through the pressure of the ACDP, the bill was removed. The bill was removed and did not continue. So this is another success story of civil society working with us in Parliament, raising good legal arguments, and it been stopped in Parliament. So, dear Vaughan, I wanted to end on a positive note, because at least we can see that we can take hands with civil society. We can push, if you've got men and women that stand up for their values with courage and determination. One with God is a majority. You don't need the majority. You said it yourself, Christopher. One with God is a majority. Thank you very much, and to God be the glory. Amen.
I think I'm going to give someone the task, and for those that are watching this video, to please go through the video and find out how many times did Uncle Steve here say ACDP while he was talking. I just want to say that ACDP is not sponsoring this video. They are not sponsoring this video. If they want to be a sponsor, I'll accept. I'll send you guys the invoice. Does anyone have any questions? Right, let's start with Rowan in the front.
Thank you very much, everybody. It's really informative and interesting to listen to you. Firstly, it's Ascension Day. The Lord is risen, and
Hallelujah.
we used to have a public holiday, but thanks be to God. But I think you've mentioned foreign interest agendas, and I think all these bills, when you look at them, is clearly a very strategic strategy behind this. This doesn't happen by accident. And these things are being forced through. Can you explain a little bit about how these donations work, where up to R500,000 at a time are given to various entities in order to, and then mostly along with the legislation that they now want implemented, come hell or high water? Firstly, how is that not criminal? And given that these are the sorts of actions that are influencing these bills in many instances, how does that not automatically delegitimize the law?
Yeah, just my experience of the years has been that because we've got financial constraints on a number of our departments, so you've got international aid organizations that make donations directed to the departments to promote their own agenda. So you had Planned Parenthood, for example. That was a very big one, was pushing the abortion issues. And I'm sure that Mario and you guys, Christopher and Liesl, would have more knowledge as well of the money that comes in purportedly to help South African government and the departments have all got an agenda. They've all got strings attached to it. And I think that is the concern. And I think, Mario, when you did the comprehensive sexuality issue, touch on that with the publication of those booklets that were sponsored by international funding.
Yeah, I think my bit would be to add the two cases, and the detail is vague to me now. I want to say almost it is the BELA Bill march today that has had some effect on me remembering, but the details is a bit sketchy for me right now to definitively put it down. But with the comprehensive sexuality education, we know that the department had several what they call stakeholders, not only sponsoring, the material and the design and creation of the booklets. We also know that, for instance, when we engage SAPRA around the vaccinations, one of the key things that the committee actually asked, this is now the Committee of Health, was to ask what donations the department has received, for instance, from the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, and how that influences them in how they, advance or speak on any matter. Can you actually say you're independent and that you are not influenced by any of your donors? And actually it was a question that the EFF, Naledi Chirwa, raised very well a few times to say, can you tell us where the money comes from? Because there was a 20 million rand that was given. And now, when you receive all that money, can you truly say that you are going to, whose interest are you going to look after? Is it the interest of the people, or is it the interest of the ones that you give money to? And I think for South Africans, I should say that what we are needing to really investigate or assess as we go for voting is to say, what drives political parties? What in the last 30 years has a political party shown me? Is it the interest of South African, of me as a citizen? And how does that show up if they have my interest at heart? Is under the tree. Is meaning, do they engage with me? Do they consult with me? Do they consider my views? And it's got to do with the constituency work. I'm maybe going a little bit further down the path, but the aspect of self-interest has to do with money, and it has to do with how political parties conduct themselves and government conducts itself. So yes, I would say donations that we see on budget lines, those things are important for people to consider. Who gives money for what?
Thank you. I would just add, I think it'd be a very worthwhile exercise to follow the money, as people say, to see where it comes from. And it's not just with, policies and legislation. With the World Health Organization, there's a lot of questions about where the World Health Organization gets their money from, and whether whoever the entity is, whether it's a government department or something like that organization, and whose interests are they acting, or is it kind of like being for sale in a sense? You don't want that, yes, that is with, for example, this ECE Toolkit was developed by a 40 million rand grant from a Belgian organization, VVOP, done in conjunction with the department and the University of Stellenbosch, but overseas money. So that is something that you pick up when you look at these things.
Excellent example.
Let me give some positive news, because the money doesn't always flow the wrong way.
Yes.
And so what's very interesting in the education sector in Africa is that one of the consequences of let's say the first generation of liberation education is that a vast number of Africans got to kind of get a sense of what is good education. Often that had to do with kind of a legacy that was there. When that legacy disappeared in a lot of government schools, and I'm not just talking about South Africa, this is an African issue from here all the way to Kenya and to Nigeria and across, people started saying, you know what, this isn't good, this is not good for my kids. I want to give my kids an independent education. And the World Bank has actually been very supportive of that. In terms of looking at how do we create independent education in Africa, because quite frankly, that's what Africans want. And it's amazing, Africans are willing to make huge personal sacrifices in order to secure an independent education for South Africa. One of the problems is there are not enough academic and civil society organizations to work with the World Bank. And that World Bank investment has been progressively rolled back by people who want to see state education. So it's not always the issue that there is not money for these things. it's often, or for things that are good, because it is very obvious, there's very obvious scientific evidence to support the value of independent education. It's the lack of organizations, and then once again, the lack of political parties to say, no, we're gonna fight on this ground, and we're gonna fight on this issue. So so with the money flows, as Liesl said, follow the money, always follow the money, but it's not, but also don't become despondent, because I think at the end of the day, the money follows what is effective. If there are people to say, this is effective, that's an ineffective way of spending the money.
Okay, so keep the mic. Let me ask you a question. You've spoken about organizations and normal people getting involved more with getting these organizations together. I'm sitting here going, well, as a normal person on the street, what do I have to do? How easy is it for me to get a group of people together and create an organization that's legitimate that then can get funding? How do we go about doing this?
I mean, I think you ask the $60 billion question.
Because a lot of us think it's out of reach. We can't just start an organization,
I think I think it is difficult, and it's difficult and it's easy. I think what you've got to do is, and it is difficult, but what you've got to do is you've got to find people who I think first are willing to put more in than they're going to take out. That's the first important starting step. It's, I think, to find people it's to have very sound, well worked out principles that attract people. And then it's also about being pragmatic, because no organization is perfect, no political party is perfect, and this affects how people vote. People say, Steve is this or whatever, that may, I'm not picking on Steve, but no one's perfect. You wouldn't go, the party you vote for, it's like saying, South Africans have got this like weird duality about politics, right? First, we all hate politicians, but we all talk about politics all the time. And then, but at the same time, we hate politicians, but we expect them to be the Messiah. And the problem there is that you'd go to work, even if the guy at work is lazy and is not the greatest guy to work with. Yeah. You go to work, even if the guy next door to you has BO. But the problem is that we judge political parties like, oh no, I'm not going to vote this time around because of this or that, or the party's not perfect. No party is perfect, just like no workplace is perfect. If you're not going to vote, if you're not going to support a party that's got warts, then what I want to suggest to you is don't go to work tomorrow if the guy has BO, the guy next to you has BO. Don't do it. See how long that works for you.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Identify yourself, please.
Right. Real Swart.
Oh, I know you.
My question is, would you say that it is very good news for us as Christians in South Africa, bearing in mind that there are 75% of us, if you ask to identify yourself what your faith is, it's Christian, that having a representative in Parliament can actually, in this next election, which is our 7th election, give us a brand new opportunity to vote for our values this time. Because you've seen for 30 years now it hasn't worked, voting the way we have, but we don't need a strong opposition in my eye. We need a brand new government. So if we're sitting with 75% of the population, surely it's not rocket science that maybe it would be very good news for all of us to get the word out in the next 20 days to all our Christian friends, our churches, etc., to get behind a vehicle that represents our Christian values. And there is somebody that represents our Christian values in Parliament since 1994. So, do you think this would be a good idea? That's my question.
Vaughan, can I just say that what is very interesting with this election, it's probably one of the most critical elections ever. When it comes to the smaller growing parties, like the Freedom Front Plus, like the ACDP, people love us, but they say, we must vote for the bigger parties. Western Cape, we've got to vote for the DA to keep the ANC on. This election, with the multi-party charter, I think gives you the opportunity to vote for your values, to vote for your Christian values, in the knowledge that the parties are working together, and without Vaughan pushing a political party too much. But it is the opportunity to vote for the ACDP in the knowledge that we are working in a multi-party charter where your values will be protected.
Yeah.
And I think that is critical. And with a proven track record of what we shared tonight, and that we have co-governed with those parties in the metros. So I think it is the first time that that message can resonate with the majority of Christians that would normally... Voters are very fickle. They'll wake up in the morning and say, who should I vote for? But here, but it does give you the opportunity to realize, once you've listened, and this would be my appeal to listeners tonight, to realize the threat to our Judeo-Christian values that we've all illustrated tonight. And that it is critical for us to vote with your values, your Judeo-Christian values. And even if you still have a sense of fear, no, we've got to vote, you now know that we are working in a multi-party charter. And I think it is a win-win situation.
Anybody else? Liesl?
Yeah, I just want to add on to that. People sometimes ask us about public participation and, voting. And then I say to them, public participation is not voting once every 4 years or so.
Yeah.
Voting is the least you can do. It starts there. It starts being involved. It starts with knowing what's going on. And I know everybody's not going to sit and watch Parliament or read the Hansard or something like that. But there are people that you can follow, organisations such as ourselves if you're interested in religious freedoms, other organisations if you're interested in other sorts of democratic rights, to see what's going on so that you can cast that vote for your values. I think that's a very good catchphrase, vote for your values. Because it's not just about you. It's about, Christians say, you need to love your neighbour. And it's, now I'm not speaking as far as I'm speaking in a personal capacity, because FORSA is faith neutral, but speaking in a personal capacity, going out and voting according to your values is a way that you can love your neighbour in this country, because it's a way that you can help ensure that those who promote those values that you believe are in the best interest of yourself and your children and your community and others, it's not just about you, it's about everyone, it can promote that. So that's really, it really is important. And now back to my 4SA hat, we've looked at the bills that came through Parliament, and we have a scorecard of how different political parties engage with bills on freedom of religious issues. And we also have a scorecard of how the government departments dealt with freedom of religion issues, because many of these documents, as they are being developed in government departments, as was correctly pointed out, the executive, the government departments, they don't have a very good public participation process often. Department of Home Affairs did very well, with their marriage law reform policy, so, give credit where it's due. But some other departments really did very poorly. So that's also interesting reading for somebody who is interested in, what's happening where, and are these departments, are they actually upholding religious freedom? Just because, well, that's our specific focus, but what are they actually doing?
Sorry, just a quick word, and from an apolitical perspective, a party political perspective, if I'm allowed to say that. But I think there's two important things to know, which is one, that South Africa, this election is very important because we're going through a fundamental transition. We had essentially, while the Constitution was changed a long time ago, and people to my left are involved in that, we have a proportional representation constitution, and it gets a lot of kind of flack on one level. But the issue is we were still thinking as if we were in a Westminster system. So politics takes a very long time, your political culture takes a very long time. We were thinking Westminster system while living in a proportional representation constitution. And there's one thing that I can say. In a proportional representation system, small, focused, united parties have a huge outsize impact.
Yeah, it's true.
look at, and you may disagree with them, you may like them, you may not like them. I'm making a political science observation. Look at the role of the ultra-Orthodox religious parties in Israel. They, up until very recently, over many, many years, have been able to get their people out of military conscription. It's one of the most fundamental constituencies of one of the most fundamental capabilities of a state. You know, even the most libertarian people say, well, you know, if the state gets attacked, then we need people to go out and fight. But the ultra-Orthodox religious parties in Israel have been able to keep, to certain degrees, and there's qualifications, but being able to keep people out even of the military in a state like Israel. It tells you about the outsized role that that political parties, the small, focused political parties have. I've come down from Gauteng. I don't even know what party my mayor belongs to, the mayor of Joburg, okay? I know he's got something between 8 and 10 bodyguards, but I don't know the name of his party, okay?
You don't want to know.
I don't want to know, but the point is that is example, that's a living example of the power of small political parties in coalitions, but in proportional representation government systems. And I think the second point is, and I think it's a very valid point to say vote your values, but the problem is everyone says vote your values. I think what you've got to do is you've got to say, how does your party, in practical policy terms, put those values into action?
Yeah.
So when you've got however many days, you've got 20 or so days, find out how the party that you intend voting for is going to put your values into practical policy, practical planned policy. How is that going to happen? And that is a key, I think that's the key determinant, because everyone can say, it's, just vote your values, and I think it's an important point, but the point is find out how those values are going to be put into action.
Yeah, I think I want to underline that, because I think one of the key things that we as the ACDP certainly, and I will say that, obviously there's a bias, is that in 30 years, organizations, because I come from an organizational change background, organizations grow in cycles. And one of the things that we can pride ourselves on is that the concept, the inception of the ACDP was based on defending and standing for the Christian worldview and for the biblical transformation of South Africa based on those principles. That was the idea. But it takes time for an organization to develop the kind of leadership and capacity for them to develop the idea into policy and legislation, and for them to have that capability. And that's why I want to emphasize what Christopher's just said. It is okay for people to get the catchphrase or the essence of vote your values, but it is very important to understand that, especially in the South African context, that we are not in 1994 where an idea is being sold to you. We are now at the place in our democracy where we need governance that will be reflective of the people, and at the same time, the capability to bring about the next phase for South Africa. Because what we have seen now in the desperation, it's a good thing, but there should be caution as well. The good thing is the sense of entrepreneurial politics, almost, if that's such a phrase, where you have a lot of parties coming and people putting their hand up. Because South Africans are not passive. We are not people who's going to roll out and die. We just have it in our DNA that if something is wrong, we will fix it, and we will get up. If you put us down, we will get up. So what we've seen is failure in 30 years, and people are putting their hands up left, right, and center and saying, me to the electorate. But it is important for the electorate to understand that you need organizations that has the capability, that reflects what it is that you want to see. Because what we have spoken of tonight here with you is to say, you need to understand that policy, legislation, underneath all of it is the ideology of whomever is standing in government. And you need to ask, the people that I am thinking about, what is their world view? We know what the worldview of the African National Congress is. And we know what the worldview is. And if I may say lastly, the African National Congress was founded on Christian principles of justice. It is not the same organization anymore. No way. This is not Albert Luthuli, Charlotte Matric. No. This is a communist, Marxist, it's political. Are you going to be in trouble?
No.
But I mean, this is the ideology. This is the ideology that underpins it, you know? And I absolutely want to stress this to South Africans, is that we can no longer look at South Africa within the context of the past, which is color and history.
Yeah.
Meaning, I vote because I never ever want to be governed by a white man again. Or I'm voting because I'm looking for somebody that looks like me. Okay, same color as me. No, we cannot afford it. 30 years of politics has brought us here, where we have voted on liberation theology. It is now time for us to vote in accordance to how we want the country to see. And truly lastly, the African Christian Democratic Party is the only party that can truly stand up and say that we are a multiracial party, that are not on the basis of any race putting it out. Why is that important? It is important because our country is polarized, divided, and the kind of politics that is being presented is one that is not visionary, it's not futuristic. We need politicians that are thinking about the people of this country and not about the narrative that will save us another round in government.
Yeah, the Association of Christian Media has put out a very good campaign called Vote Your Values. So they're a little bit ahead of the curve, which I'm very happy about. But here's the problem with 80% Christian in South Africa. We're 80% Christian on a Sunday. And we talk about our values very often. And I think what we're hearing here is what we're trying to say is, where's the practicality? Where is the Monday to Saturday or the everyday going out and being practical about your values? We are missing that. You know, we live in a world where you can get up, and I like to use Tyson Fury as an example. Not in his last fight against Francis Ngannou, who was an ex-UFC fighter, and he almost got beaten, but in his last title fight, and I love playing this video for Christians because it shows you exactly how shallow Christianity has become with not practically living out our values and living out our worldview according to biblical principles. Tyson Fury, at the end of his last fight that he won to retain the world title in boxing, said, "I just want to thank my Savior, Lord, and Jesus Christ for everything He has done for me, for helping me to get through this fight and win this title." And 3 minutes later, he was swearing like a trooper, telling everyone how he's taking all his boys out and they're going to go out and have a night on the town and have a party and go absolutely crazy. What kind of a message are you sending there? And this is where I say, people say, but Vaughan, 80% Christian. Yes, 80% that Christian. It's not 80% worldview, biblical principle Christian. And I'm going to say ACDP now. Because these guys, and I'm not pro ACDP. I've got a lot of friends in the ACDP, and they are all quality people. There might be few of them, but even the guys that I know from eThekwini, I'm very good friends with Jamal Isop. We've sweated blood in the communities together. Pastor Wayne, besides being deputy president of the ACDP, we've sweated blood together in the Indian communities and in the colored communities in Durban, because we care. Because we practically want to be there for people. You want to hear the heart of the ACDP, and I'm not promoting my own content here, but go and listen to the 2-hour discussion me and Pastor Wayne had on the couch downstairs, where we just chatted off the cuff on camera for 2 hours. I was shocked what that man had to say to me, because I didn't realize how much of a man of integrity he really, really is. He's an amazing human being. Forget about being deputy president of the ACDP. And the ACDP is full of these people. There might be few of them, but this is why they have such an impact. And I'm not going to say ACDP again. Let's see, we're going to go, well, maybe one or two more questions, because I know we've been going on for a long time. I don't want to keep everyone up past 12. We might all turn into pumpkins. Any more questions? Yes, sir, at the back there.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for this wonderful platform. And I just want to ask, because people ask us this question, and I think I need to ask it to the honourable members of the Parliament. Is the multi-charter, is it a coalition, or is it just an agreement on certain issues, but is it a certain differences?
Coalition, just an agreement.
So it's important to note that the concept of coalition governments has been around a long time, okay? And we are entering into that realm now where all polls are indicating that the ANC is going to be below 40%. So it is a reality. At local government level, we have had multi-party governments, or coalition governments have been in existence. The ACDP, the DA, the Freedom Front Plus, the IFP, COPE have been part of those, and we've taken control very effectively of running those coalitions. But when you have an unstable partner, that person will hop from one to the next, whoever can offer them the most. And in Johannesburg, you've got the situation where the two big parties, the ANC and the EFF, can't abide each other. Now they've appointed a non-entity who's now the mayor of our financial capital. It's a disaster. So the multi-party charter is a framework agreement setting out policy and rules for post-elections to set up a coalition government should the need arise. It's not a coalition government now. It is setting out what would be the framework for the discussions, what would be our policies. So there's been a lot of discussion around policies. There's been a lot of discussions, because you don't want to sit on the first day after the elections. Now you've got to sort out where are we in agreement. So it is a framework agreement. It is not a coalition at this point. It is looking towards forming a coalition government. At the same time, we are in coalition governments at local government level. Those are operating at the moment, okay? That's practically. But it is setting out the framework. And I think one of the things we're going to have to move to in the country is to have legislation governing coalition governments. Because you cannot have people, and a coalition agreement is not legally enforceable. It's almost like a gentleman's agreement. Yeah. Well, it's not even often for gentlemen, because as soon as you get a better offer, you hop to the other side. But I was in Kenya, and I was very impressed with their statutory regulations, pre-election and post-election coalition legislation. And I was in Germany, where we studied as leaders in the nation. We went, all the top parties, right, we all went to Germany to study coalition governments. They got a well-established coalition governments there. Their public sector, their civil servants help the political parties formulate the coalition agreements. And they ensure that every party that is part of the coalition government has parts of their manifesto included. So I think this is something that we're looking towards. But at this stage, we are all contesting separately. But you would have seen the multi-party charter, I think last week had a meeting where we were all represented, and we set out our policy on social development at the SASSA offices that are absolutely in a appalling state, and said this is how we're going to improve it. So that is why it's so important for you to understand that at this stage it is not a formal coalition, it is a framework agreement, but it is such a win-win situation when you are speaking, particularly here in the Western Cape, to voters to say, here you can vote for your Christian values in the knowledge that we are part of a multi-party, multi-party framework, charter, that we will work together after the elections. And I think that gives you an idea. So I hope that clarifies it. there is an agreement, but it is not a coalition agreement, because then you've got to set out who gets what positions and that type of thing. And the last point I wanted to make on that is what we learned in Germany is, firstly, those people that could benefit from a coalition agreement should not participate in the negotiations. So you've got Joburg, the guy should not, he's the mayor. And you never push for positions, you push for the common good of the people.
Yeah.
Whereas in South Africa, it's all about what can I get?
Yeah.
What position can I get? And I think this is something that we need to learn from established governments of coalitions. Israel is a wonderful example of, they've always had coalitions, and they often have in elections, and it shows you the impact that a small party can have in such, you can become the kingmaker. And the ACDP was the kingmaker in the Western Cape, where they needed our one seat to pass the Western Cape Constitution, the provincial constitution. We needed one seat, and we were able to promote a number of values there in an informal agreement to vote together to pass a provincial constitution. So I hope that helps you understand that. It's a very important message to pass out to the electorate at this stage. Thank you, Vaughan.
Okay, so I think we're going to leave it there because we have gone on for a long time, except we're just going to let Christopher start off, leave his lasting impressions with you, and then we'll let Liesl and Mari say something. Don't think Steve needs to say anything. No, I'm just teasing.
No, I've said enough.
Everyone's picking on Steve tonight.
Sorry, I just wanted to answer. I will make my closing comment just an answer to Honourable Sukers' question about the penalty clause in the BELA Bill. Now, I see that the UN's not that popular, but let me say that our government picks and chooses what comes out of the UN. UNESCO did a very intensive study in what is the effect of putting legal penalties on creating truancy laws. So truancy's American term is probably where if you don't go to school, they're going to make some law to force people to go to school, and we're going to penalise parents through fines, through jail, through any of those. UNESCO's research showed that when you do that, you actually make school attendance worse. And this was actually made clear to the committee. It was made clear to the committee in a legal opinion. It was made clear to the committee in a criminological opinion. A lot of people made submissions and said, guys, look, if you make it a penalty, you make it worse. And it's not illogical, because if you say to me, if you are keeping your child out of school, I'm going to come and hunt you down. You know what's the first thing I do? Is I go and hide that child away. And I'm less likely to comply. What was needed there was what's needed, and this is it's a shocking example in the Act, and it was pushed through in a way that I thought was, I can only use this word used many Afrikaans words, kragdadig. It was like there was this kragdadige attitude, which was like, round up these ridiculous parents who are doing this without compassion, without saying this is a social problem that needs social solutions, that ignored the science on the issue, and that came from UNESCO. So that, I think, hopefully that just answers what you asked. And it's actually it's just one of the parts of the BELA Bill that I'm just gobsmacked about how bad that particular part is, and from a country that claims to be progressive, and we go for this kind of, literally put the stormtroopers out there to grab the kids kind of approach, which does not work. And we should be using social mechanisms, and we should be using mechanisms like the Children's Court to, because the Children's Court can then assist and bring all these social partners into play and say, okay, let's create a parenting plan, let's get this family into a house, and then we can start worrying about why the kids are not in school.
Lasting impressions.
I think my general takeaway from all of this is that in a country that has this constitution that talks about diversity and protecting diversity, we see trends that true diversity is actually being undermined. If you want to present one worldview in education to the exclusion or marginalization of others, if you create laws that if somebody's just in a loving, legitimate way express their worldview, their religion, and what they feel about things, there's a chance that they might be prosecuted, and that might lead to self-censorship. It's a chilling of democracy. It's a chilling of freedom. My one colleague says that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, and I think South Africans need to really, I don't want to say wake up because it sounds a bit harsh, but we need to be awake. We need to be awake, and we need to participate, because we have rights. But with a right, you always have a corresponding responsibility, and we need to exercise our rights. Otherwise, we risk losing our rights, and we risk it being watered down. And I think in this country, in our history, we know that active public participation and civic society can push back against horrendous things. And we need that again. We need that strong, that where the power is really with the people and really reflects the true diversity of our nation, so that there is a place where everybody is welcome, and nobody needs to be silenced because they have a particular view. And that includes, the views of the religious community that is, even though apparently we're 80% Christian, the religious views are kind of being marginalized at the moment. We want true diversity where everybody has their space, but that is something that we will contend for. It's not something that you can just sit idly by and think it's going to still be there in 5 years if you don't make a stand for it, because it's something that is important and that is valuable, and it is worth protecting.
My comments is going to be part reflection and part what I think we really need to pay attention to as citizens and as South Africans, whether we're politicians or not. The one is that I was in Queenstown with the BELA Bill when I had just one moment. It was at a very contentious time where it became very clear to the governing party that this is not going to be a walk in the park. And because absolutely we mobilized our communities, and especially Christians and people of faith, to come up against this legislation. And I was in a moment sitting by myself in Queenstown because things has become so contentious that, like Steve said, the members of the majority party really didn't want to see me, and literally I had people, attacking me in public hearings, it is totally actually strange for that to happen.
It's not allowed. And
it's not allowed, but they allowed it. And I was sitting outside, and I was sitting by myself, and the whole committee, obviously, on that side. I'm like the child that is being put out of the schoolyard. And as I was sitting there, I was contemplating, and I was really the weight of where we at as a nation. It was in that moment where really the responsibility for us as political leaders, as Christian politicians, as well as churches and spiritual leaders and communities, to truly understand where we at in the nation, really dawned on me. But as I was sitting there, from the side there was a car stopped, and I just see on my left just this line of union members, ANC supporters, EFF. And I'm thinking, God, I'm outnumbered here today. And in fact, they were absolutely certain that I'm outnumbered. Because one of the members came to me and says, "Vandag kry jy pakkies so Sukers." So I was sitting there, and and just on the side, a bakkie stopped. And a mother and a father got out. And a young little girl with a piece of paper in her hand. And as they got out, the family, I immediately knew this is the homeschoolers that are coming. But as they were coming towards me, they were walking, coming towards me, in my heart I knew that this is the crucible for South Africa, where the values that will hold this country and define the future. This is this moment, you know. So they walked up to me, and she came because she wants to give me something. What it meant to me was, we are fighting for the identity of a nation. And what I want to stress tonight, in everything that we have spoken about, is we as a nation need to reflect to the values that has taken us through one of the worst systems that you can think of, apartheid. And I come from a community that suffered that. And we lived under poverty. But there's one thing that has preserved us, and that is the values of Christianity, the Christian worldview. South Africa is going into its next phase. Everything points towards darkness. But we know that the darkness cannot overcome the light. And it is so important for Christians of every denomination, regardless whether you're Catholic or Presbyterian, Methodist or whoever, but that we absolutely understand that what is at play is identity. And values, convictions and beliefs and worldview has to do with identity. So my message to South Africa really is, this nation is not going to go under. It is not another Zimbabwe. We have the decision in our hands, just like the Israelites did when God said to them, go through the Jordan. Joshua turned to them, and there he makes a covenant with God again. And he says to them, you make a decision today who you are going to serve. But me and my house, we are going to serve the Lord. And we are right there at the River Jordan, where South Africa needs to decide. And the future depends on the decisions that we make on the 29th of May.
Sure, that's good. So just to end off for the next half an hour, I think just reflecting on what you've heard tonight, and I would really also appeal the listeners that are listening to this show on Christian media, whatever, our nation is in a critical state when it comes to our moral fiber, and it is an attack on our children, on the next generation, from an evil ideology. And that is what we've heard tonight as we've been fighting and this battle, the BELA battle, the decriminalisation of prostitution, the World Health Organization. It is an agenda against the next generation. Yeah. And it is so important. Today in Parliament, it was the ACDP that wished everyone a happy Ascension Day. Let us remember the Ascension Day. So whilst it is very important to say vote your values, it's at the same time important what has been your track record for the last 30 years. And I think that is so key. And today I spoke in Parliament about the code of ethics for members of Parliament, how you should conduct yourself. That's disgraceful. Surely, an elected representative should know how to conduct themselves. That they are honest, that they are people of integrity, that they will put the common interest ahead of their own interests, that they will not be selfish, greedy. And the Bible shows us what type of elected officials we should have. In Exodus 18 verse 21, but select capable men. It doesn't say select capable they. Select capable men, and let's say women.
Yes.
From all the people, men and women who fear God, trustworthy, who hate dishonest gain. And as I said in Parliament today, the ACDP stands for those values of servant leadership and understands stewardship of state resources. But what our listeners have heard tonight is Maurice Sukers that has fought this battle, and Liesl and Christopher that are fighting this battle. But we've got the opportunity on the 29th of May to stand up for our Judeo-Christian principles and vote for those that have been fighting for the last 30 years and have had a measure of success. But as Isaiah tells us, where the nation is crying out to leaders, and Israel was in a desperate time and cried out to the watchman on the wall and said, "Watchman, what do you see?" And the watchman responded. It's repeated. "Watchman, what of the night?" All they could see was night. And the watchman said, "The morning comes. The morning comes." But also the night. So not denying the challenges. But we know the morning is here and the morning is coming. And Jesus is the morning star. But as we stand for our Judeo-Christian values, we will ensure that the morning comes and the darkness is dissipated and removed. And so that is what I would like to thank. And I'd like to honor everyone that's here. And thank you, Vaughan, for allowing us to share these concepts. And it is a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call. And we as watchmen on the wall that are seeing this, all of us here, are alerting the public. This is a critical time in our nation. Do the right thing. Do the right thing. Thank you so much.
I'm just going to end off by saying this. We need to start doing what Jesus said in order to complete the law. If we are not willing to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters, there is something wrong. If we are not willing to love like you want people to love you. And you must understand these two principles, if you just understand what that means fully, the concept, everything will change. You'll be willing to do everything and anything to build a better country and a better life for the person sitting next to you, not for yourself. So I'm not going to say vote for the ACDP. I'm going to say look at the politicians, look at the people who are in charge, from government to provincial, to your municipalities, to your local ward councillors. Look at them and ask yourself the question, are they willing to lay down their life for me? Or are they willing to lie on a fat couch full of money? Are they willing to love unconditionally? Or is there something else at play there? If those two principles aren't adhered to, then you need to seriously consider who you're looking up to, who you are supporting, and who you are voting for. So thank you guys for coming tonight. I really appreciate you sitting through all of this. Thank you, Liesl. Thank you, Maury. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Steve. I don't know how all these guys got here tonight, but I'm very happy that even Maury was double booked and we had to sort something out and move an entire community meeting so she could be here tonight, which was great. They really took time out to come here and speak to you guys, and obviously to create this content that we are going to create and put it out into all the social platforms. So guys, for participating, thank you guys very much. And again, for the panel, let's give them one last round of applause. And like they would say, not because they're great people, they're great servants. They are great servants. Thank you guys.